Right now, somewhere in your kitchen, there is a bag of pure white sugar, cheap, sweet, and available in seconds, for a few coins at most. Ancient humans would have fought off wild bees, risked broken bones, and climbed cliffs with bare hands just to get a taste of anything close to that little bag sitting on your shelf. Let's go back, long before farms, before cities, before writing itself, our ancestors already had a taste for sweetness. It's built into us. A newborn baby prefers sweet liquid over bitter or sour ones, and scientists think this goes back millions of years, tied to the fact that ripe fruit is safe, energy-rich, and easy to digest. Sour or bitter often meant unripe, or worse, poisonous. So early humans who liked sweet things tended to survive better and pass on that same craving. That same craving is still sitting inside every single one of us today, every time we reach for dessert. But liking sweetness and having sugar are two very different problems. For most of human history, the sugar sitting in your kitchen simply did not exist anywhere on the planet. What did exist was fruit, and it wasn't the fruit you're picturing. Wild fruit tens of thousands of years ago was smaller, tougher, and far less sweet than anything sold in a modern grocery store. Bananas, apples, and grapes have all been selectively bred over long stretches of time to be sweeter and bigger than their wild ancestors ever were. So an early human biting into a wild apple ancestor was getting a fraction of the sugar hit we get today, and probably a mouthful of seeds and tough skin along with it. On top of fruit, there were root vegetables and tubers that carried a mild natural sweetness once cooked, plus the faint sweetness locked inside grains and starchy plants, which our own saliva can slowly break down into sugar as we chew. None of this compares to a spoonful of table sugar, but it added up. Every one of these food sources took work. Digging, cooking, testing which plants were safe to eat. Nothing sweet in this world simply showed up on a shelf. It had to be found or dug up or climbed for. That left one real jackpot, honey, and getting it was nowhere near as easy as opening a jar. There's a rock painting in Spain, in a shelter called Cuevas de la Araña, that shows a human figure climbing on ropes or vines, reaching into a cliffside beehive while bees swarm around. That painting is thousands of years old, and it's one of the earliest clear pictures we have of humans deliberately hunting honey. This wasn't a backyard hobby. Wild bees nest in cliffs, in hollow trees, in gaps 30 or 40 feet off the ground. Getting the honey meant climbing without safety gear, smoking out angry bees with fire, and accepting that you were going to get strung, a lot on purpose, for something sweet. Honey hunting like this wasn't a one-off. Anthropologists have studied hunter-gatherer groups in more recent history, like the Hadza people in Tanzania, who still gather wild honey today using techniques that likely echo what humans did tens of thousands of years earlier. For the Hadza, honey isn't a treat on the side. It's one of the most calorie-dense foods available to them, and some studies suggest it can make up a real chunk of their diet during certain seasons. That tells us something important. Sweetness wasn't just a pleasure for ancient humans. It was a serious source of fuel, worth real physical risk to get. Ancient Egypt gives us another clear window into this whole story. Egyptians kept bees in clay hives thousands of years ago, and honey shows up constantly in their records, used as everyday food, as medicine for open wounds, and even placed carefully in tombs as an offering for the afterlife. Jars of honey have been found in Egyptian burial sites still intact after thousands of years, since honey barely spoils under the right conditions. That alone tells you how much value ancient people placed on it. This wasn't just something sweet to snack on. It was worth burying with the dead, worth dedicating farming labor and skilled beekeeping to, worth writing down and passing along as knowledge. Now here's where it gets more interesting, because sugar in the crystallized form we use today, the kind you scoop into a spoon, has a much more specific and much later origin story. Sugarcane itself was first domesticated in New Guinea, roughly 8,000 years ago, but for a very long time, people didn't turn it into sugar at all. They just chewed the raw stalk to suck out the sweet juice, the way you might chew on sugarcane at a market today in parts of Asia or the Caribbean. From New Guinea, sugarcane slowly traveled outward into Southeast Asia, into India, carried along by trade and migration over thousands of years. The real turning point happened in India, sometime around the middle of the first millennium, roughly 1700 years ago, during the Gupta period. That's where people figured out how to boil down sugarcane juice and crystallize it into a solid form that could be stored, transporting, and traded, instead of just chewed on the spot. This process was genuinely a big deal, because it turned a perishable plant juice into something closer to a durable good, almost like turning fresh milk into cheese. Sanskrit texts from this era already describe sugar production methods, which tells us this wasn't an accident. It was a real, developed technology, refined by generations of farmers and craftspeople who understood exactly how to boil, cool, and shape the syrup into something new. From India, sugar traveled west along trade routes into Persia, and then into the Arab world, where it kept spreading and improving. Arab traders and scholars refined production techniques further and helped move sugar into the Mediterranean world. By the time of the Crusades, European soldiers and travelers were encountering sugar in the Middle East, and many of them wrote about it like it was some kind of miracle substance, calling it something close to sweet salt in their own words. That phrase alone tells you how rare and strange refined sugar seemed to people who had only ever known honey and fruit. Once sugar reached Europe, it did not become an everyday food overnight. It stayed expensive for centuries, priced almost like a rare spice brought in from the other side of the world, which in a way it was. In medieval Europe, sugar was treated less like a food and more like a spice or a medicine. It showed up in the pharmacies of wealthy households, prescribed for coughs, stomach issues, and general weakness, sold in small, costly quantities, sometimes locked away with other rare goods alongside pepper and cinnamon. Only kings, nobles, and the very rich could afford it regularly. A common laborer in medieval Europe might go their entire life tasting refined sugar only a handful of times, if ever, and would have known sweetness mainly through honey, dried fruit, or nothing at all. Physicians of the time even wrote about sugar as a kind of healing substance, mixing it into remedies the way we might mix medicine into a spoonful of syrup today. That idea sounds strange now, sugar as medicine, but it shows just how rare and precious this white, crystallized substance really was. It wasn't sitting in a bowl on the table. It was locked in a cabinet, treated with the same care as a costly imported spice. Everything changed with the rise of colonial sugar plantations, starting in the 1500s. Sugarcane was planted across the Caribbean and parts of the Americas on a massive scale, worked by enslaved Africans under brutal conditions that historians rightly describe as one of the most devastating systems in human history. This is a heavy and important part of the story, and it's the real reason sugar eventually became cheap enough for ordinary people in Europe to afford. What had once required climbing cliffs for wild honey now came from an industrial system built on forced labor. The sweetness stayed the same. The cost of producing it, in human terms, became enormous. By the 1700s and 1800s, sugar had gone from a rare luxury to a normal household item across much of Europe, showing up in tea, in baking, in jams. What took our ancient ancestors real physical danger to get in tiny amounts became something people could buy in bulk, without a second thought, at a shop down the street. So here's the payoff, the thing that's easy to miss. Our taste for sugar is ancient, wired into us from a time when sweetness usually meant survival, when a sweet berry told your brain this is safe and this is fuel. But actual sugar, the pure, easy, always available kind, is genuinely new in the story of our species, arriving only in the last sliver of human existence. For almost all of human history, sweetness was rare, seasonal, and often dangerous to get. You didn't casually snack on it. You earned it, sometimes with stings, sometimes with burns from smoking out a hive, sometimes with a long trade route stretching across continents and centuries. Line up the whole span of human history like a single day, from sunrise to midnight. Honey hunting and wild fruit would fill nearly the entire day. Crystallized sugar wouldn't show up until deep into the evening. And sugar becoming cheap, common, and sitting in every kitchen cupboard wouldn't happen until the very last few minutes before midnight. That's how recent this is. Your great-great-grandparents likely grew up at a time when sugar was still something of a treat, saved for special occasions, not a default ingredient stirred into everything from bread to sauces to drinks without any second thought. That means the modern habit of sugar being everywhere, in every drink, every snack, every aisle of the store, is a tiny blip compared to the tens of thousands of years our bodies spent craving something we almost never got. Our brains never got the memo that the shortage ended. They still react to sugar the exact same way they did when it was rare and precious, which is part of why it's so hard to resist today. Next time you unwrap a candy bar without thinking twice, or stir a spoonful of sugar into your morning coffee without even looking at it, remember that somewhere back down your family line, an ancestor of yours was hanging off a cliff face, smoking out angry bees, risking a serious fall, just for a few mouthfuls of something this sweet.